The world of fashion is filled with various styles and powerful brands, from household names like Gucci and Louis Vuitton to brands owned by celebrities like Yeezy by Kanye West and Savage X Fenty by Rihanna. These brands make statements with their releases and usually try out something outlandish and bold. Despite the uniqueness of their actions and styles, a fashion brand did that right after a world war, and this has heavily impacted how most fashion brands approach unique and bold styles for the public. Christian Dior, popularly known simply as Dior, has established its place amongst the most dominant fashion brands in the world. This feat is by no means a joke, as they made a revenue of 64.2 billion euros in 2021, barely a year after COVID had put the whole world on lockdown. Who was behind the growth and popular appeal of this brand? How did a fashion brand that started right after World War II become so iconic? Growing up, Christian Dior was born in Granville, a seaside town on the coast of Normandy in France. His father was a successful businessman who manufactured fertilizer. His parents, Alexander Louis Maurice Dior and Isabelle Dior, had 5 children, and he was the second to be born. Raymond, Jacqueline, Bernard, and Catherine were his 4 siblings. His family relocated to Paris when he was 5 years old, and he spent most of his childhood in that city. However, they did occasionally travel to the coast of Normandy for vacations. Even though his family had hoped that he would go into the diplomatic field, Dior always had a strong interest in the arts and exhibited an interest in becoming an architect when he was a child. In the beginning, he would sell his fashion sketches in front of his house for approximately 10 cents each. After much persuasion from his father, he finally gave in and enrolled in the École des Sciences Politiques in 1925 to begin his education in political science. He did this with the expectation that he would one day find work in the diplomatic service. In 1928, when he was still a youth, Christian Dior left school and used the money he got from his father to open a modest art gallery. There, he and a friend of his hawked works by artists such as Pablo Picasso. His father only gave him the money for the gallery under the condition that the family's name would not appear on the gallery's door, as was courtesy. Georges Braque, Pablo Picasso, Jean Cocteau, and Max Jacob were among the well-known artists whose work was displayed at the Dior Gallery during the brief period that it was operational. The gallery was closed 3 years later following the deaths of Dior's mother and brother, and financial trouble during the Great Depression that resulted in his father losing control of the family business. Getting into fashion. After his gallery was shut down, Dior began to look for alternatives to make ends meet, and then he began to sell his fashion sketches. He lived on that for a while before finally getting a job in 1935. He began to work with Figaro Illustré as an illustrator. After working with Figaro for a while, he became an assistant to fashion designer Robert Piguet. While working with Piguet, he got his first opportunity to design for Piguet's collection, a rare opportunity. Particularly well welcomed was one of his original designs for Piguet, a day dress with a short, full skirt that was given the name Café Anglais. In later years, Dior noted that one of the most vital lessons he learned from Robert Piguet was the value of how simplicity was the true bedrock of elegance in fashion design. During his time at Piguet, Christian Dior worked alongside Pierre Balmain, who was eventually replaced as house designer by Marc Bohan. In 1960, Marc Bohan became the head of design for Christian Dior Paris. Dior left Piguet because he was required to serve in the military at the time. Nothing much is recorded about his stint in the army, only that he was drafted. He served until France lost to Germany, and he returned to Paris. After this, he joined the fashion house Lucien Lelon. Time at Lucien Lelon. At Lucien, he and Balmain were the house's primary designers. As a French designer in a country already defeated by Germany, Dior was involved in designing dresses for wives of Nazi officers and French collaborators. They were not the only fashion house doing this. Other fashion houses, such as Nina Ricci and Jean Patou, also did this to survive during the war. The fundamental objective of the French design businesses that collaborated with the Nazis during the war was to preserve the French fashion industry during the conflict for a variety of reasons, including economic and creative considerations. His younger sister, Catherine, joined the French resistance during this time. She was caught by the Gestapo and taken to the Ravensbrück detention camp. She remained there until she was liberated in May of 1945. The brand Dior is born. After the war ended, Marcel Boussac invited Dior to his fashion house, Philippe de Gaston. He wanted Dior to be a designer for him, but Dior refused. Back then, Boussac was recognized as the richest man in France, willing to pay handsomely for the services of Dior. Dior, who was no longer interested in working under another fashion house, sought a fresh start with his brand. Dior decided to start his brand on the 16th of December 1946. He was backed by Marcel Boussac, who recognized his talent and invested 68 million francs in Dior's new brand. While he started in 1946, February of 1947 is often recognized as the brand's official start date because Dior officially launched his debut collection on the 12th of that month. The brand was started at 30 Avenue Montaigne, Paris. His first collection was named Corolle, which directly translated to a circle of flower petals in English. Still, this name took the backseat to the phrase new look, coined for his designs by U.S. Harper's Bazaar magazine editor Carmel Snow. There were 90 different looks in this collection, reinventing the old, taking bold fashion steps. Although Snow had termed the collection by Dior New Look, the collection was not all that new. In fact, it relied heavily on styles from the Edwardian era. Dior merely polished and solidified patterns in skirt shape and waistline that had flourished in high fashion from the late 1930s. Despite this, Dior's designs were more sensual and expressive than the boxy, fabric-conserving shapes of recent World War II fashions, which were motivated by fabric rationing. Dior was regarded as a master of shapes and silhouette, and he even noted how he had been able to make dresses that made women into flower women. His style featured mostly percale-lined fabrics, boned bustier-type bodices, hip padding, wasp-waisted corsets, and petticoats that spread his dresses out from the waist. This gave his models an extremely voluptuous figure. Backlash. While some welcomed Dior's styles and collection, there were those who did not appreciate it and showed their displeasure. This group was made up of women who felt that Dior's styles covered too much of the legs, as they were used to open skirts because of fabric rationing during the war. They also felt Dior was too generous with the materials he spent on each dress or suit he made. This backlash was not restricted to just the everyday fashion enthusiast. Even established designers had one or two things to say about Dior's style. Gabrielle Coco Chanel said that the new look looked ridiculous on women, and labeled Dior a man who designed clothes for women but knew nothing about their bodies, and even dreamed about being one. During one photo shoot that took place in a Paris market, the models were harassed by female merchants due to their extravagant dressing. Still, this hostility was eventually put to rest after the wartime rationing ended. Restoring Paris to glory. From 1948 to 1957, Dior continued to dazzle the fashion world, with new collections that established him as a force to be reckoned with in the fashion scene. The new look helped revolutionize the way dresses were made for women, and restored France to global fashion dominance after the war. The collection also placed Dior as an important figure in the fashion world for most of the following decade. Among his accomplishments was the establishment of a luxury ready-to-wear house, a new concept back then. This house was located on 5th Avenue and 57th Street in New York. This was launched in November of 1948. That same year, Dior Parfum had also launched, with Miss Dior being the first fragrance to launch, and Diorama launching the following year. With this, Dior had begun to penetrate the American market. In 1949, Christian Dior made history by being the first couturier to secure licensed manufacture of his creations. Dior, along with his business partner Jacques Rouet, licensed his name to a range of luxury accessories after realizing the significance of the overall combination, and the fact that the new look could not be properly completed without the appropriate Dior shoes, gloves, and hat. Additionally, furs, stockings, ties, and perfume were produced in regional centers worldwide, which helped fast disseminate his brand name throughout the entire world. Even though this action was strongly criticized by the French Chamber of Couture, who blasted the move as cheapening the haute couture sector, licensing turned out to be a profitable move for Dior, and practically all of the period's fashion firms followed the Atelier's example. In just 11 years, he expanded his company into 15 other nations and provided employment for over 2,000 individuals. Yves Saint Laurent, then only 19 years old, began working as a design assistant for Christian Dior in 1955. Later, in 1957, Christian Dior went to see Yves Saint Laurent's mother, Lucienne Mathieu Saint Laurent, to reveal to her that he intended to appoint Saint Laurent as his successor at Dior. She stated that due to the fact that Dior was just 52 years old at the time, the comment had left her perplexed. Death. In 1957, a few months after appearing on the cover of Time magazine, Christian Dior took a vacation in the Italian town of Montecatini. His destination was the country of Italy. In that location, on October 23, 1957, he experienced what would be his third heart attack, and he passed away at the age of 52. The funeral for Christian Dior was attended by an estimated 2,500 people, including all of Dior's employees, as well as many of the designer's most famous customers. Marcel Boussac sent his private plane to Montecatini to bring Dior's body back to Paris. He was laid to rest in the Cimetière de Callion in the French region of Var. At the time of his passing, Dior's mansion brought in more than $20 million each year in revenue. The legacy of Christian Dior. In the years Dior had spent in the fashion industry, he had completely changed fashion, and he has arguably had the biggest impact on modern fashion. He had some quirks about him, one of which was that he was a very superstitious man. This superstitious belief did not ebb with age, rather it grew stronger. It was said that before starting a fashion show, he would consult his tarot card reader first. To mark his 70th anniversary of the designer's debut, The House of Dior, 70 Years of Haute Couture was released in 2017 by the National Gallery of Victoria. The coffee table book spans 256 pages and features stunning images documenting the history of the French fashion house. For more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.